No? Hello, everybody. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, so if you would, please take your seats. And if you have a cell phone, please silence it. And we'll get started in just a second. Okay, first of all, let me welcome each of you here today. It's not the best weather day in D.C., but it's not as bad as some have been, so thank you for braving the cold and the snow. Before we get started, I'd like to highlight a few housekeeping matters. First of all, in case of emergency, the doors to exit are immediately behind you. Each of you walked in those doors, go out the same doors if we have an emergency. Second, the restrooms are directly behind the wall you see when you walk out the doors. If you need help with anything, please find an FCC staffer and we'll be glad to direct you. You also probably noticed on your chairs there are note cards. Those note cards are for you to write any questions that you may have for the panelists. Once you have written your question on the card, please hold it up and we'll have an FCC staffer come and get that from you. And we'll vet those, give those to the moderators at the end or when they're asking for questions. If you are participating via webcast, you can also submit questions to livequestions, one word, livequestions at fcc.gov. For those of you who are participating on panel one, I would like to ask you to take your seats after we are finished with the opening remarks. So just remember to, the name tents are at the table and you'll take your seats at that point. I'd now like to introduce Henning Schultzrenne, our Chief Technologist, and Jonathan Chambers, who is the Chief of our Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis. Henning.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you again for coming to what I hope is the beginning of a dialogue on how we can, on a technology side, improve, sustain, and develop the relay services that so many depend on as a crucial part of their daily life, their work, their social life, and for civic participation. This is a new effort. It is certainly not the first time that we have, as the Commission and as a broader community, looked at video relay service, text relay service, and other relay services, but it is an attempt to broaden the conversation. We have, I believe, at least 5 groups that have crucial contributions to make to improving relay services in general, to better integrate people with communication disabilities into everyday life. First of all, naturally, we have a community of people who rely on our relay services collectively. They have been crucial from the very beginning to drive the technology, to drive the requirements, to keep us at the Commission honest in making sure that they meet those requirements, in making sure that we understand what equivalency means in real-world terms. We also have on the implementation side, the providers, naturally the ones that run the services day to day, that have direct involvement with the user community in that. And they have played a crucial role in driving technology forward, in introducing new services along the way, be it IP relay or IP caption telephone service, for example. We have also a new community, relatively speaking, a broadening community, namely the general research community, both in industry and in academia. There's always been a vibrant research community in those areas specifically focused on the needs of people with disabilities, but I think recently we've also seen a much broader interest in areas that may not have traditionally seen that as an area of research or applicability. Indeed, one of the foundational goals of the workshop today is to start and broaden that conversation into bringing in people who may not necessarily have thought of themselves as doing research in this particular area, but rather who have technology, insight, long-term perspectives to contribute in crucial pieces of technology that can support those relay services. Fourth, we have a new opportunity that we hope to leverage within the Commission, namely to provide a common platform to enable research and rapid deployment of new research results. Indeed, I believe this has been a theme in recent computer science and engineering disciplines where instead of everybody's trying to build from the ground up the new infrastructures that you need to actually deploy research results at scale, you build a common platform that other people can rely on. Physics has done this for quite a while, but computer science, in particular, and electrical engineering and related disciplines, is starting to recognize the potential of that type of approach. For example, in networking test beds that some of the people who are on the networking side are familiar with. And lastly, the Commission, as a facilitator and convener, manager of the overall program, where we see our goals to bring together those four communities that either already exist or hopefully emerge to achieve the goals that we are obligated by statute and that we take very seriously just as individual professionals as well. Namely, to increase the effectiveness and efficiency, to allow us to scale these services to people who could use it but can't currently because of limits of technology or limits of scalability that we would have. Indeed, relay services in general have, to some extent, been an early pioneer in many services that we now take for granted on a larger scale. I'll just pick, in the interest of time, one example that some of you have helped with, namely text to 911 services, where the initial needs were driven by the need to support people who would not be able to make voice calls in an emergency, but are now hopefully able to very soon text to 911, and that service will then be usable by people who could otherwise make voice calls when those are not feasible for other reasons. IP captioning and captioning in general, other examples that one can point to. What has changed? What has changed is that we now have a much more integrated technology where instead of seeing relay services as a niche thing that just is useful only for a relatively small number of people, that we now have technologies where text, video, and voice can and should be integrated into everyday communication technology. That fundamentally allows us to do things that were never possible before, because we only had voice communication as kind of the ends of the communication chain. Now, text and video in particular are becoming much more readily available, and indeed we can now think about how we integrate those technologies into an overall relay framework as opposed to simply thinking about the translation of voice into text or ASL video, as the case may be. That can help effectiveness, privacy, and can make the program more efficient, all of that. Thus, today, I hope we can start exploring those opportunities. We should not, I believe, be constrained what is possible today. We have distinguished researchers on our panels that can help us explore what is possible not just next year, but 5 years from now or 10 years from now. But those things won't happen until and unless we start today looking at those technologies, exploring those technologies, and making sure that the needs of people who use relay services are factored into research early on, as opposed to simply trying to figure out what existing technologies we can repurpose for supporting the needs of people with disabilities. With that, I'd like to move into the main part of the discussion with one of our external speakers. We have the honor of welcoming today Mary A. Barnard, who is a Deputy Director of the National Institute of Aging. She was formerly the Reynolds Chair in Geriatric Medicine and Chairman and Professor of the Reynolds Department of Geriatric Medicine at the University of Oklahoma and College of Medicine. She has held many distinguished positions. Her bio, as everybody else's, is available on your sheet. So without further ado, Dr. Barnard.
Good morning. I stand here to greet you on behalf of the National Institute on Aging, wearing my hat as Deputy Director of that institute. But as well as was noted, I'm a geriatrician. And I have, over my career, seen on a daily basis older individuals who are suffering from challenges as a result of hearing impairment. It is a problem that can be tragic for an individual as they progressively feel more isolated and less willing to be involved in activities such as church activities or joining family reunions because of the difficulties with hearing, and the challenges with getting appropriate technology to enable them to better participate in society. So that's the geriatrician hat. From the administrator's viewpoint, representing NIA, hearing impairment and disability is one of the most prevalent functional disabilities among American seniors. It affects some 20 million, or 50% of America's older adults, 65 and older. Among the hearing impaired and disabled community, the majority are older adults. This disability can significantly impact the ability of older Americans to communicate with their loved ones and to perform simple daily tasks, as I have seen over my career. At the National Institute on Aging, we look for opportunities to support outstanding research that will promote a better understanding of communication problems for older Americans, and including those who have hearing disabilities. We've long supported research grants, small business grants, and conference grants to understand and promote speech communication for American older adults. And two of our long-term grantees, Dr. Karen Cruikshanks and Dr. Sandra Gordon-Salant, will be speaking on behalf of the research community later today. The telecommunication relay services provided by the Federal Communications Commission are an important and integral part of the technologies and services that may enhance hearing disabled Americans to enjoy the exchange of information and communicate with their loved ones through simple phone calls, which becomes very, very important as one gets older. NIA is pleased with this great opportunity to collaborate with FCC and to assess the current and future telecommunications relay technologies and services for the hearing disabled community. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Barnard. Thank you to the National Institute on Aging in particular, and also I'd like to recognize, although they couldn't be here today, the National Science Foundation. Those two federal institutes will be two of the FCC's partners as we move forward to fund research into telecommunications relay services. Funding research is not something that the FCC has ever done before, not directly. And so we're going to lean on the National Institutes on Aging. We're going to lean on NIH. We're going to lean on the National Science Foundation to help us examine research proposals, solicit research proposals, determine which proposals ought to be funded. And so, again, we welcome you today and thank you very much for being our partner in this effort. It's my task now, my privilege now, to introduce Commissioner Clyburn. I just want to say one thing about Commissioner Clyburn and ask her to come and address you all. While chairwoman of this commission, as people have noted in other areas, Chairwoman Clyburn's tenure was short, but her list of accomplishments was long. And that's particularly the case in relay services. While chairwoman, the commission adopted an order on speech-to-speech relay services, adopted an order on IP caption telephone services, and adopted an order on video relay services. That order is the reason we're here today, because contained within that order were several parts, but two of significance for the discussion today. One of which the Commission decided that it would fund the construction of a common neutral relay services platform. Henning spoke a little bit to that earlier in his remarks, and we will get into that later during the discussion. Second, the Commission decided for the first time it would fund research into the development, enhancement, improvement of relay services. Again, something that the Commission has not done before. And this is, for me, if you take anything else away from these discussions today, please take away this. Our effort, starting today, is an invitation. It's an invitation to researchers. It's an invitation to users of relay services. It's an invitation to technologists. It's an invitation to companies that are currently not otherwise engaged in relay services to help the FCC enhance, improve to the extent possible relay services so that all Americans may benefit. And with that, let me again turn this to Commissioner Clyburn. Thank you for getting all of this started so many months ago.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that warm introduction, and I appreciate the help that you and the entire Commission that you gave for this effort. This is a proud morning for us all, and I appreciate the ability to be with you. After a long holiday weekend, which for me wasn't much of a holiday, I hope that everyone has a lot of stored energy for this very important workshop. I say it's not that wasn't a great holiday because I ended up going down south and ran into a snowstorm and spent 2 days in a house that I hadn't been in for a while, so maybe that was a holiday. And then Valentine's night had a nice gift at about 10:23 that evening with an earthquake. So I've had a very interesting, but nothing was going to keep me away from you this morning. I agree. We are focusing on an area this morning where the Commission may help to facilitate research which can significantly enhance and improve the lives of millions of Americans who are deaf, hard of hearing, or speech impaired. Given where we are today with smartphones and video chats, it is somewhat hard to believe that it was not until the 1970s when the text, telephone, or TTY service was commercially available. And not until 2002 did the FCC adopt rules to ensure that wireless service providers were capable of completing emergency 911 calls made using a TTY device. This means that for almost a century, after the telephone was invented in the late 1800s, millions were left unable to complete a basic phone call. But I'm happy to affirm that technology advancements have broken down these and many other barriers, and today, services such as video relay service, video conferencing, and texting better enable exchanges on parity with their peers. But there is much, much more to do. Technology can further enhance and improve the lives of persons who are deaf, hard of hearing, or speech impaired, with even better access to communication services like multimedia communications incorporating HD audio, video, and real-time text. And I am proud, as Jonathan mentioned, that the FCC adopted an order to develop an open platform for new and improved IP-based relay services, and I am pleased that last month the agency set aside $3 million in funding for research and development to improve TRS service and the consumer's experience. Research can unleash potential that we cannot even imagine today. This workshop will cover some important topics on research opportunities and includes a group of esteemed panelists and academics. I know everyone is eager, like I am, to get started, so I will close again by thanking Jonathan Chambers for his leadership on this and helping to put this workshop together. And to all of you in the audience and online, Thank you so much for your participation and attendance. My best wishes for a robust engagement. Good morning.
We'd now like to ask panel 1 to come and take your seats, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody. I'm going to start with introductions. After I introduce each panelist, they'll have several minutes to make an introductory statement, and then we will have discussion, and we will also entertain questions, and I guess people can submit questions online. They can write questions down and submit them to the table in the back here. And we'll get through as many of your questions as we can. So first, let me introduce. Let's start with, just to my left, Karen Cruikshanks. Karen is a professor at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. She received her PhD in epidemiology from the University of Pittsburgh. She's the principal investigator of 2 longitudinal cohort studies of sensory aging funded by the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Cruikshanks has served on the National Deafness and Communications Disorders Advisory Council, the American Academy of Audiology's Task Force, and I will stumble over the medical terms here, the Institute of Medicine Committee on Long-Term Effects of Blast Exposure, and the Institute of Medicine Committee on Assessment of Noise-Induced Hearing Loss in the Military Service from World War II to the present. Welcome, Dr. Cruikshanks.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this exciting discussion. I'm an epidemiologist, as you've heard, who studies sensory changes in aging through large longitudinal cohort studies supported by the National Institute on Aging. The goals of our research program are to understand the impact of age-related sensory disorders from a public health perspective and to identify modifiable and genetic factors which contribute to the decline in sensory function with age. Hearing impairment is a major focus of our research because communication is such an essential and important part of life for everyone. Studies are showing that the ability to effectively receive and interpret information from others is important for remaining engaged in society, maintaining independence, and for enjoying life as we age. When declining auditory function limits that pathway, alternative or assisted communication options may be important for healthy aging. To give you a population or public health perspective on the need for communication services, I'd like to share with you some information from our studies in Wisconsin to make 3 points. First, hearing impairments are common in midlife on and often are mild or moderate in severity. Second, many people with mild or moderate hearing impairments struggle with telephone communication. And lastly, as you plan for the future, the hearing-impaired public appears to be receptive to using technology, providing an opportunity to use innovative approaches and new technologies to improve communication for aging adults. In the first slide, the prevalence of hearing impairment by age in 2 cohort studies is shown on the left-hand part of the slide. The EHLS, or Epidemiology of Hearing Loss study, is a population-based cohort study of older adults in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. The BOSS, or Beaver Dam Offspring Study, follows the children of the EHLS participants. The children were ages 21 to 84 and may live anywhere in the world, although most reside in Wisconsin. Hearing was tested by pure tone audiometry, and hearing impairment defined as an elevated average threshold in the speech frequencies. As you can see, hearing impairments are common, affecting about 1 in 6 people in their 50s and 1 in 2 by ages 70 to 79. The BOSS participants represent baby boomers and Generation X, while the EHLS cohort represents the greatest and the silent generations. As the baby boomers age and continue to develop hearing impairments, there will be very large numbers of adults living many years with hearing impairments. As part of our questionnaires, we asked people, do you have difficulty understanding the conversation when talking on the telephone? The right-hand graph shows you the percent of hearing-impaired people who reported telephone communication difficulties by age. People with normal hearing were excluded. More than one-third of the people with mild or moderate hearing impairments reported having problems using the telephone. The last slide shows you the use of cell phones on the left and home computer use on the right by age group in the BOSS cohort. Today's middle-aged adults, and therefore the future's elderly, are frequent users of technology and may be receptive to new approaches to effectively communicate as they experience age-related changes in hearing. I look forward to today's discussion and congratulate the FCC and the NIA on forming this partnership to make evidence-based decisions on methods to improve communication services. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Cruikshanks. Next on the panel, we have Lisa Hamlin from the Hearing Loss Association of America. Lisa joined the HLAA as Director of Public Policy in April 2008. Lisa has been the HLAA's representative on the FCC's Consumer Advisory Committee and has served on the Video Programming and Emergency Access Advisory Committee, the Communications, Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council, as well as the ADIS Working Group on hearing aid compatible phones. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. Hearing Loss Association wishes to thank the Commission for this opportunity to speak today and be part of this workshop. Just briefly, I wanted to say that Hearing Loss Association of America is a national membership organization of consumers with chapters around the country with whom I speak almost every day. Now, it's self-evident that access to telecommunications is important to every American who wants to fully participate in society. Congress, recognizing the importance of telecommunications for all Americans, included access to telecommunications as an integral part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That happened 25 years ago, almost 25 years ago. Now, with that congressional leadership and foresight, access to telecommunications was no longer left to the vagaries of a marketplace, but rather ensured as part of a statute and as a civil right. That provision benefits us all, those of us with hearing loss, like myself, and those who work with us, who want to talk to us by phone, people who deal with us every single day. Now, I'm going to focus on IPCTS, the Internet Protocol Captioned Telephone Services. Now, that's a service members of HLA have told us they use regularly, and it's a service I use and depend on daily at work and at home. From the perspective of an advocate, IPCTS, both landline and mobile, has great potential. These phones are very user-friendly, and to people who grew up with a traditional phone, can use these phones very easily. So the people who are aging into hearing loss that Dr. Cruikshanks was just talking about, these are the people who are using these IPCTS phones. However, as a consumer, when I use it, I find it has yet to proven to be fully functionally equivalent to a traditional phone. Error rate is very high. The delay between speech and text is very long, and it gets longer as the conversation goes on. And the phone was never designed to be used in the workplace. So it requires an employer who is willing to install a dedicated line, and that line never truly marries to the rest of the phones in the office. As for mobile captioning, it isn't supported on many phones, included on my own not quite so smart phone these days. Research has encompasses IPCTS must not forget the basics. Consumers must be able to have reasonable expectation that they will be able, the error rate is low, the delay is short, and the phone can be used in home or in the workplace successfully. I can see I've run out of time, but my remarks are available to anybody who would like to see them aside there. So I'm going to cut it short here. But I just want you to remember that consumers with hearing loss who use their residual hearing and who have the ability to use their own voice as well do need access to phones as well. We urge you to look not only at the long-term solutions, and we hope you do look at that. We want to incorporate video and text and voice and be able to have it all. But we also want you to look at what's happening now. Don't forget the basics. Let's get between here and there and make sure that people with hearing loss have the access they need. We still have reports, and I do want to say this, we still have reports from people who have not gotten a job because they failed a phone interview, and others who have been forced into early retirement because they cannot keep up with phone calls, even with using the kind of systems we have now with the caption phones available to them now. So we urge you to look at all of these things in your research, and I thank you for this opportunity to speak here today.
Thank you, Lisa. Next on the panel, we have Andrew Phillips. Andrew is the Policy Counsel at the National Association of the Deaf. He is responsible for providing analysis, recommendations, and counsel to the NAD on policy issues affecting deaf and hard of hearing people across the United States. Andrew is heavily involved with the NAD's work on federal legislation, rulemaking at the FCC and other federal agencies. I know I can speak from personal experience, the effectiveness of Andrew's advocacy. Andrew earned his law degree at the University of California, Hastings College of Law in San Francisco, and there was a member of the Hastings Science and Technology Law Journal. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Jonathan. The National Association for the Deaf appreciates this opportunity to participate in this panel discussion on enhancing the consumer experience through the development of a platform for the delivery of improved IP-based relay services. Relay services, made possible by Title IV of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, has been a great equalizer for deaf and hard of hearing people. Before relay services, we had to rely on hearing family, friends, coworkers, and neighbors to make our telephone calls for us, ranging from calling in sick to school, for our children to make doctor's appointments, to work-related calls. We had no independence in making telephone calls and zero access to telecommunications. I personally am lucky to live in a world where deaf and hard of hearing people experience more equality in telecommunications access, and I can make telephone calls independently. As we discuss ways to improve access to IP-based relay services, we must not forget that relay services is a civil right and must be treated with the highest level of respect and care. This distinction is critically important and requires that decisions related to improving IP-based relay services must have the full support of the deaf and hard of hearing community. Moreover, any changes that are proposed with respect to their telecommunications access must be carefully scrutinized to make sure that none of the changes will in any way diminish their access or reduce the quality of relay services. The NAD appreciates that effort is being made in research to find ways to improve functional equivalency in relay services as well as efficiency. However, we have strong concerns about the involvement of deaf and hard of hearing people and their community in this research. We cannot accept a system or changes proposed or made without the full inclusion of the very people who use IP-based relay services every day. Those directing any research or creating a platform should include a substantial number of deaf and hard of hearing people themselves in the process. All research efforts must include a range of deaf and hard of hearing people with various communications needs. This platform, if built with the full support and involvement of the deaf and hard of hearing community, has the potential to improve communication access for deaf and hard of hearing people. At the same time, NAD cautions that there must not be a rush to replace the current system, but rather develop new options for access that supplement what we have now, rather than suppress the access we currently enjoy. After all, countless hours of research advocacy, and FCC regulation have gone into creating the IP-based relay access that we have had for the past 10 years. We also have reservations about how this platform will continue to improve and adopt new types of technology outside the current competitive environment we have with providers. Providers need to be able to freely add new technology and enhance their products and services. For instance, in the current environment, IP-based relay providers rush to make their products usable on the newest smartphone software platforms. We ask that this constant drive for improvement be maintained with this proposed platform. One way should be to allow current providers to keep their own platforms and compete against them. The NAD understands that this is only the beginning and sees a lot of potential for improved access, but only if the full involvement and support of the deaf and hard of hearing community is assured. Moreover, all proposed changes must happen with careful deliberation, for any sudden adjustments can lead to errors and reductions in levels of access, which can have serious implications on deaf and hard of hearing people. We need to have ease in making our phone calls, as our lives and jobs depend on telecommunication access just like everybody else. Thank you for putting effort in this research and development to ensure our civil rights. I believe that there are $3 million of research. I'm not sure that that is enough to fully develop a platform that will provide access to all deaf and hard of hearing people. If the platform is underfunded, we will only have reduced access compared to what is currently available from providers. For instance, this funding probably is not enough to make sure the platform is accessible to deaf-blind people, those who are deaf, hard of hearing, and also have cognitive disabilities, as well as other smaller segments of the deaf and hard of hearing population who need specialized access to relay services. We're concerned that excluding providers from the reference platform bidding might eliminate optimal options for research. After all, the providers are among the very few who understand how to provide telecommunication access to deaf and hard of hearing people. There's a lot of expertise that can be offered by providers, and this expertise needs to be somehow utilized in this research initiative. Moreover, the NAD has long pushed for making our relay system interoperable among providers' platforms, as well as mainstream equipment and software. We need to be able to access IP-based relay technologies from mainstream products, as well as products specially tailored to our communication needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Before I introduce Christian Vogler, let me clarify one thing that might be confusing about the FCC's funding in these efforts. The $3 million of research funding that we're discussing today is wholly apart from the monies that will be spent on the development of the neutral communications platform or the reference platform. The research dollars are a separate effort to the extent that the two efforts run in parallel, or to the extent that the two efforts may be combined. It's only so that we can spend money on research, and that research might inform the future development and enhancement of the platform. But the platform itself, this neutral communications platform, will be put out for bid in the coming weeks. There will be a request for proposals in the coming weeks for both the communications platform and the reference platform. Those bids will drive how much money gets spent on those platforms, not this $3 million. So I wanted to catch that at this point, so because it is clear from Andrew's remarks that some of the discussion has been conflated. I may be guilty of confusing the issue by discussing the two together. As I say, my hope is that the research that's done by academics, that's done by anyone that wishes to propose research, that might help inform both the Commission and inform those that are developing the platform on what technologies work best for the users of relay services. So, with that, let me get right back to the panel and Dr. Christian Vogler. Christian is an associate professor at the Department of Communication Studies and the director of the Technology Access Program at Gallaudet University. Christian is a co-principal investigator within the Rehabilitation Engineering Research Center on telecommunications access, with a particular focus on the accessibility of emergency calling, telecollaboration, and everyday telecommunication methods. In his role at the RERC, he is involved in bringing consumers and industry together on accessibility issues, as well as developing prototype technologies for improving the accessibility of such systems. Thank you, Christian, for being here today, and we look forward to your remarks.
All right, good morning. I'm going to talk a little about two fundamental principles that any research and development in the area of relay services need to follow. What I'm about to say is from both my perspective as a consumer and as someone who has led telecommunication accessibility research projects for the past 3 years and seen the widely divergent needs of the community. First, there must be a focus on accessibility and, above all, usability. I agree that there will be technology coming down the road that enables new ways of access that we can't even dream about yet. But usability is even more important. And let me tell you, this is hard to get right. Not just for those who already have access today through VRS, IP relay, and IPCTS, and who are used to things working a certain way. But also for those who have been left out, because their numbers are too small to get attention from the industry. Like, for example, the deaf-blind. It's the little things that make a big difference. And those little things need a lot of attention in R&D. And R&D needs to tap consumers who have been using relay services for close to 25 years, as well as the service providers. There is an enormous level of expertise and knowledge right there, and any successful project is going to involve both deeply in all stages from beginning to end. So this needs to be a key criterion for funding proposals, or we'll just end up throwing out what we already have. Second, no more communication silos. I'm deeply concerned that we're stuck in a mindset of relay services being a separate system from mainstream telecom. That model worked when we had only PSTN, and when mainstream offerings weren't good enough to give consumers what they needed for relay calls. But that's not true anymore today. In an IP world, we have a wide range of service platforms, and functional equivalence means that we must be able to participate in this. In fact, I asked around in my class, and 100% of my students use FaceTime, but only 15% use mobile VRS apps. We don't need a closed system. We need a system that lets consumers use whatever they need. The relay service platform is an important part of this, but only a small part of it, for those for whom this is the best solution. But this one system can't be everything to everyone. People with disabilities are far too diverse for that. So we need ways for people to customize and enhance the platform without any hassles. And we need ways for mainstream services to to interoperate with that platform and with relay services on both sides of the call, so that when we communicate directly with the mainstream where we can, and communicate through relay services even if the person on the other side of the call doesn't have a 10-digit phone number.
Thank you, Christian. Thank all of you for your remarks. I'm going to suggest one thing and turn my questions back to the panel. Any who wish to answer, please do, and we'll just move on from there. My hope is that this will become much more of a discussion. My hope over the long term is that the research funding, the development of a communications platform, all of those efforts become much more of a discussion, a dialogue, and very much in line with what Christian was just talking about, that our watchword is openness. I would say, just to start, and I want to pick up on the last thing that Christian was talking about, that is no more communication silos. I couldn't agree more. I think this commission couldn't agree more. I think that as much as anything, what drove the video relay services reform effort last year was that very idea. No more communication silos. Christian mentioned FaceTime. FaceTime, by the way, is a closed system. In a way, it's part of the problem. 100% of your students use FaceTime, and yet you can't use FaceTime to call a user of Purple or Sorensen or Z's platform because there's no interoperability between FaceTime and the relay services. There's no interoperability between FaceTime and Skype. There's no interoperability between FaceTime and Skype and Tango. So if one relies on video calling, one has to have friends, family, other users of video services who use the exact same service you do. It's never been like that in telecommunications in this country or anywhere else. One of the principles of telecommunications policy has long been a universality of service, interconnection amongst networks, so that anyone, no matter whose provider the caller uses, is able to reach somebody else on the system. That doesn't exist today for people who rely on video calling. While in the FCC's order last year and in prior FCC orders and pronouncements, we have attempted to get interoperability amongst VRS providers. We are a long ways today from interoperability amongst callers, users of video calling. It is something my colleague Henning Schultrini is intimately familiar with. And so that's a long-winded lead up to ask back to Christian, Andrew, Annie, our vision of the neutral communications platform was an effort to drive interoperability across platforms, an effort to make it possible to call from one system to another system. And so my question back to you all is, how do you see those two working together? Christian, you spoke in particular about the low percentage of your students who use VRS apps and the high percentage who use FaceTime, my guess maybe Skype and others. How do we get those types of systems to work together so that VRS is more in the mainstream and not in a silo?
I can respond to that. I would say, first of all, I understand that the mainstream interoperability can be an issue, and there's a significant difference between the VRS world and the mainstream world. In the mainstream world, they have a choice. If they are calling somebody, they could use any method. They could call through Skype, for example, and then if they're calling somebody else, they can call through FaceTime. They could use either one in the mainstream world. But as a deaf or hard of hearing person, if you're calling a hearing person through the phone system, you only have a choice between a certain number of people with a PSTN number, any of those relay services. And that involves services that facilitate communication. And Skype and FaceTime don't offer those types of services. Those systems are closed, private systems. But the concept is that in a mainstream society, interoperability through the phone system is not a concern. We have to have the same opportunity when making any types of call through any type of system. And my concern right now is that the vision is not there. For example, in the SIP forum, the standards group has a strong mission or goal to make service platforms that are fully 100% reliable for any VRS provider. That means that if somebody from another platform, any outsider, comes up with another system, it must be interoperable. For example, FaceTime or any other service platform. The danger is that the VRS providers' platforms don't allow for those external platforms to use their service and their operators. And that's a risk today. For example, I joined a phone conference system at one point, and I had to use the service for that. I had to use VRS, and the conference system, the IP video and audio was a concern. There wasn't a compatibility with the VRS server. And the technology there was just very limited. And at that point, I didn't know what to do. I had to find another way around it. I had to find another number. And I hope that this conference will provide, the conference call would have a bridge provided. And some do, I can say that, but that's not true for all. And we need to have that in order to eliminate the barriers to communication. So I encourage you to look at those ongoing visions, those long-term visions for the future outside of the mainstream. I mean that the VRS platform, but also others, to allow for any type of service to be interoperable.
This is Andrew. If I can chime in, I fully support everything that Christian just stated. Christian has a much better technology explanation than I could ever put words to. Watching him, I can see what the future is supposed to look like. I would like to think that the neutral platform will help that. This type of issue with regard to enhanced communication services, or advanced communication services, I should say, is something that obviously Congress had in mind when they passed the CVAA, the 21st Century Communications and Video Communications Act. And in today's world, we are definitely evolving to an IP-based world, both in video and telecommunications and communications in general. And as part of the CVAA, video conferencing equipment must be accessible for people who are deaf or hard of hearing or have various disabilities. And so I'd like to think that the platform will assist with that so that we can get involved, if you will, in 21st century communications.
Thanks very much. we're getting some questions from the audience and online, so I'll turn to some of that. Dr. Cruikshanks mentioned how many people in the country have difficulty communicating by phone. That's a very high percentage. The percentage increases as people get older. As somebody once told me some years back, if you don't feel you have a need for relay services, just wait a while. You'll get older and you will need them. In my view, let me say something, a personal view about the users, or what is sometimes referred to as the beneficiaries of relay services. I don't think the beneficiaries of relay services are just people who are deaf, are just people who have hearing disabilities or speech disabilities. Everybody is a beneficiary of relay services. Everybody who uses a telecommunications network is a beneficiary of relay services. The other day when I needed to speak with Christian, we had a conference call amongst the people here on the panel. The only way I could communicate with Christian on that conference call was through relay services, which of course made me a beneficiary of relay services. It is also a core principle of telecommunications policy that the network itself is enhanced by the number of people who can use the network. It's not to the benefit of just people who live, say, in a rural area that the FCC and states and others spend money getting telephone lines out to rural areas. It is the benefit of the entire network. It is the benefit of all users of all the networks. So when I think of the users of relay services, when I think of the beneficiaries, I think of myself. And I think everybody should think of themselves, which is to say, we spend money on relay services, we help ourselves, all of us. And one of the comments that both Christian and Andrew were just making made me think of something, and I want to ask if anybody has thoughts on this. This again gets to Christian's comment about silos and about treating relay services as somehow separate from the communications networks. The calls are two-way calls. There's somebody on the other end of that call. And I know from looking at the data that a very high percentage of calls are made to call centers of large companies. Comcast, Time Warner, AT&T, Verizon, Citibank, you name it. Lots of calls go in for obvious reasons. If you want to reach a friend who uses American Sign Language, you can make a video call. If you want to send a note to a friend, you might text them, might send them an email. But if you have to reach your cable company because your system's down and you can't watch television, well, good luck sending an email. Good luck sending a text. We all have lots of ways of communicating these days, but sometimes you have to reach somebody who's going to use a telephone on the other end. Now, my view is part of our focus should be on the other end of the call. That is to say, one way to improve the system is to make sure that the people who are sitting in call centers, the hearing population, the recipients of relay services calls, are aware of the calls, are set up themselves to receive and best communicate through the system. I'll give one example, and then I want to again turn this back over. Caption telephone service is currently a niche market. It serves some hundreds of thousands of users today, but we can tell from Karen's data that the need is far greater. The number of people who could use captioning to improve their communication is in the millions, maybe in the tens of millions. Now, if captioning were incorporated more generally in calling, if captioning was something that the person sitting in the Verizon call center, the person sitting in the United Airlines call center, the person sitting in the Amazon call center, if they saw the captioning, if they had the ability to correct captioning themselves so that they can ensure that what they're saying is being properly conveyed. If we had real-time text capability, that is to say, if we had video with captioning, if the common form of communication included text and captioning, would that improve communication from both sides? So, yeah.
If I may, I think the answer is yes. But I think the problem is right now, we know there are many people who could use text telephones, who could use the caption telephones. They don't know about it. So you're asking now for the hearing people to know about it, which is essentially people who are older, who age into their hearing loss, or you could think of them as people who are representative of Americans at large. The deaf community tends to, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but tends to work together, and the communication within the community, people learn about things in a way that's different from the masses who age into their hearing loss. So you're asking for communication centers, you're asking for hearing people who don't have a clue about hearing loss to know about how do I adjust, how do I get this call and understand what captioning is about, how do I correct this captioning. I think that's going to be a lot to ask right now. I think that it's something we could work toward, though, because I see it as having huge potential. And it's not just, while you may see a lot of calls now going to call centers, I can tell you that I use it every day, and I don't call a call center every day, thank God. That would be miserable. But I call my friends, I call my family, I call other people, and to have that capability with them would be wonderful. So I see it as a growing process. We need awareness in general for relay, and I think this is true for video relay as well, and for every kind of relay. We need a general raising of the level of awareness before we can get to a point where people say, yeah, okay, I can correct this, and I can go back and forth. But I think it's right now, I think it's going to be a way before we get there.
Can I add something to Lisa's point? I think there's an exciting vision for the long term. Some folks may remember back in the old days where many companies had direct TTY phone lines. Most of those companies were the ones that deaf folks would do business with because they were allowed to have direct communication. So it would be great if in the future there could be a communication system that allowed for that type of access to be brought back. But I think it will only work if the communication system, if accessibility is built in to all systems so that anyone can use it, deaf, hard of hearing, or mainstream. That, I think, is an important goal. And I also, back to something else that Lisa mentioned, I think there is excitement around this, but I would also emphasize that you need to, again, focus on the usability of things in your research. Just make sure that however it's done doesn't exclude folks or mess up the current communication system. It's a bit complicated. And also, back to a comment that was made earlier about the $3 million. I understand that the $3 million right now is just the R&D portion, and it has nothing to do with the platform itself. I get that. However, I still don't think $3 million is enough, even with that explanation. For example, the current funding program that the RERCs use is approximately $4.5 to $4.75 million. And even with that amount of money, it's impossible to address all of the needs. So if with that amount of money we can't do what we need to do, my suggestion is that the $3 million would also fall with the same problems. And this is Andrew to add to what Christian just said. I will again support what he just said, and I also would echo the need to be able to talk to anyone in various ways. I can see a future where everyone can communicate through video, text, or audio. How should I say? It would be nice to have a system that would include access to everybody, regardless of their abilities or disabilities, and I think it's a possible future. It also would be nice if my cable provider, my phone provider, would allow direct access to me through a video phone. It'd be great. I'd love to be able to contact someone and use American Sign Language to someone on the other end of the line who's using American Sign Language as a customer service representative, for example. But for that to happen, I think we need more types of communication access, different methods, if you will, and not just limit us to one particular way of communication. The population of deaf and hard of hearing people is growing, and a lot of folks believe that the size of Relay, the size of the TRS fund will also grow. But I understand that, as I've said before, Relay service is a civil right, so there should not be a concern on the amount of money that is spent. The size of the fund should not be an issue. Rather, access is what should be the issue. And if folks want to use another system, that's fine. But as a civil right, they should have a right to use Relay in a functionally equivalent way to someone who can make a direct phone call without using Relay.
I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience. How much empirical data do we have about the efficiency, effectiveness, and satisfaction of use of various groups of deaf, hard of hearing, and aged users on current platforms? That is, objective, empirical, comparative information on the usability of available platforms. Are any of you familiar with surveys or research to Christian's point about usability? Yes.
This is Andrew, and I believe the best thing that I've seen, and Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw your research from the TAP Center talked about interoperability. And I've also seen other surveys that have been implemented, but I think that there's a lot more research out there that needs to be done. Here at NAD, I've heard a lot of complaints and frustrations about accessing telecommunications. And a lot of information is not research-based, so I would like to see more research-based data, absolutely.
I'd like to add to that I'm not aware of any surveys in the general population about communication services, and I think that this is a very important issue to address with better evidence. So I concur with his comments.
I just have something brief to add. I have done 2 surveys about telecommunication and phone access with deaf and hard of people in the community up until this point. One specifically focused on IP-captioned telephone services, and the other focused on the community in general and using the phone system, using the voice phone system. The IPCTS phone survey was submitted, and we've identified more general phone communication issues up until this point. The second survey is more ongoing. In speaking with the deaf and hard of hearing community that specifically identifies as a person with a disability, I asked how they communicate with people as compared to those who are deaf or hard of hearing by age and don't identify as being deaf or as having a disability.
Turning to a couple of more questions that have come in online and from the audience. Let me answer a couple of quick ones that are in here. One, because this has also been mentioned by a couple of panelists, question is the $3 million for research and the additional money that will be spent on the neutral platform going to be taken from the TRS fund. So first let me say about the $3 million. The Commission a couple of weeks ago adopted $3 million, that is, as an amount of money that could be spent on research. It's not an annual budget, nor is it a one-time budget. It's an initial amount of money. The idea is simply this. We're soliciting research proposals. The FCC has never done this before. We don't know what's going to come through the door. The FCC itself does not have grant-making authority given to it by Congress. Therefore, we're working with federal research agencies, as I mentioned earlier, the National Science Foundation, National Institute on Aging, in order to solicit research proposals. I've said this in the context of other items in the IP technology order that was adopted. To the extent we receive a lot of good research proposals, we would spend a lot of money. To the extent we receive very few, we would spend very little money. The $3 million was just an initial amount because we had to start with something. And $3 million was roughly the amount of money that the video relay service providers spent last year on research. So it's not the right amount of money. I will grant you that. I have no idea what the right amount is. We will know better after we see research proposals, but we don't have a mechanism in place yet, and that's on us to develop along with NIA and NSF. As for where the money comes from, as with all of relay services, it comes through a collection of funds from the providers of telecommunication services. There is no set budget for telecommunications relay services either. It gets set year by year depending on need and demand. Kristen? Yeah.
Again, I have a brief comment to add in regards to the money that the VRS providers spend on research development. My issue with that is that the VRS industry in and of itself is a by-profit industry, a for-profit industry, which means that it's competitive and that money is based on investments. And my concern is that if we don't look at some of those funds, which is not enough money to really generate proper research, I think that we could be leaving a lot out. And if we leave it up to them, we aren't including deaf-blind, we aren't including other people with other disabilities that may need more. They may have other mobility or cognitive disabilities that we do need to address, and some of that would not be included from the VRS budget as we see it today.
So it's not specifically what the Commission adopted on January 30th was for telecommunications relay services at large. It's not just a VRS budget, and as I say, it's just a number. We have to see proposals before we know what the right amount is. But I do want to comment on something about the sufficiency of the money and something, again, to pick up on comments Christian has made. Apple spends more money on research than we will ever spend. Verizon spends more money on research than we will ever spend. AT&T does. Comcast does. The providers do. Samsung does. There are any number. Google does. There are any number of large companies who have research budgets that dwarf any amounts we will spend. Part of our challenge is to engage those companies so that they will spend some of their precious research dollars on relay services, on accessibility. They already do. Granted, they already do. But they're not always directed toward relay services. So part of the effort, and again, Henning can speak far more knowledgeably than I can, but part of this effort is to leverage some of the federal research dollars, some of the federal efforts, some of the researchers that normally work with federal agencies, and to try to engage companies, not just the companies that are the traditional providers of relay services, but the large mainstream commercial companies, because I got to tell you, how much money ever the providers spent in the years leading up to the deployment of the iPad, how much ever money the providers of VRS spent on video calling is nothing compared to what Apple and Samsung and Amazon and others spend. And so to make sure that relay services is a mainstream service, not a siloed service, we need to engage a broader community, which is exactly part of the effort here and exactly, I think, consistent with Christian's point about making sure that this is not all done in silos.
This is Andrew. I support the belief that there should be no more silos. I also, however, believe that we need to cherish some of the products that we currently have available from the relay providers. I think that a lot of the concern with some folks on the panel or folks out in the community comes from the fact that this platform might potentially replace what we have now. It makes us a bit nervous to replace something that we know now, and it may not be the best way. Instead, it maybe should be, it should complement what we currently have, as opposed to replace. And so whatever decisions should be made on how the systems overlap, how we should move forward, should include all of us, I think. And I also think that the FCC should ensure in its decision that whatever you do is also 508 compliant. There are many folks out there in the deaf and hard of hearing community who have other special communications needs. And some of them have not been able to fully benefit from the current relay services that we have because their numbers are so small. I'd like to see that changed.
So your comments relate to some questions that we've gotten online. Let me read those and then turn it back. One of the questions, if the FCC provided an integrated and standardized platform for VRS providers, how do you feel this will affect the desire for VRS companies to innovate and improve their products? This is currently occurring for providers to try to attract more customers and more minute usage. And then a separate question that came in, will the standardized platform be open source or simply a commonly shared platform? So I'll tell you the idea. Whether it's implemented properly is we will all see in the coming years. First, the FCC is very much trying to get the development of an open source platform for mostly for some very good reasons, which have to do with the sustainability of a platform like that and the ability of as many people as we can get to share in the development and to make this a vibrant, living thing. Andrew made a terrific comment in his opening remarks about how unless the users, let me see, I will quote him. Andrew said, "This platform, if built with the full support and involvement of the deaf and hard of hearing community, has the potential to improve communication access for deaf and hard of hearing people." I would build on that comment. It's not just if it's built with the full support and involvement of deaf and hard of hearing community. I believe that the deaf and hard of hearing community should consider this neutral platform, this open source platform, to be their platform, which, as my comment suggested earlier, means it's our platform. It's not going to be a proprietary platform. It's not going to be one provider's platform or another. Now, we are not replacing any current provider's platform. There's no requirement in the FCC rules, nor is it contemplated that any current provider of services will have to use this neutral communications platform. Providers will use it. Individuals will use the platform if it's a better platform, if we build a better mousetrap. If it isn't, then it fails. It doesn't work at all if it's not a better platform. But the pressure to build a better platform is the opportunity to build a better platform. That is to say, we need a larger community contributing to this platform. We need it to be open source so that others can use it. We will make the platform itself available to any researcher that wishes to test it, to any developer that wishes to build onto it, any programmer with a bright idea. The goal is to make this something that builds upon the community's involvement, and that is to say the community of all people. I'm sorry, Kristen, you have a...
Yes. I just want to make sure I'm understanding something you said correctly. The open platform, if adopted by the community, would be great. I just want to make clear that whatever improvements are built into the platform or whatever research is done, make sure it's done in a way that makes it easy for users to make video calls. In the past, academic R&D did not really make such enhancements to the platform. As an example, University of Washington of Seattle was completely opposed to this type of service because relay providers were not interested in adopting the improvements that they found could be made. Instead, they went their own way and didn't, again, make use of the research and development. So how can you make sure that such a thing would happen? Meaning, you could download a platform, if you will, and change it every time I wanted to make a call. Is that kind of what you have in mind when you say individuals can adopt the platform?
No, but let me just try to address it from a technical perspective a little bit. As Jonathan has mentioned, the platform really has two components, namely one which is essentially the plumbing that sits in the background and routes calls and bridges between the different components. The traditional phone system, for example, communication assistance, and the end system itself. It is largely invisible to the end user, except to the part that it is necessary to function in the background. The idea, as was mentioned before, is to provide an open platform where exactly the researchers you mentioned can provide additional functionality, which then can be integrated with the offerings through the interoperability that is already existing to some extent through direct calls. So, for example, to better serve the type of specialty needs that may not rise to the level of demand that is attractive to a commercial provider, or indeed for more experimental features that may not be quite ready for prime time as a commercial offering, but that are well worth trying out. And that we believe that cannot really act cost effectively. And you mentioned, I think both of you mentioned the constraint in overall research funding beyond the $3 million we have. One of the goals that we certainly want to measure our efforts by is, can we provide a platform that lowers the bar of entry for researchers so that they don't have to do the quote boring stuff again and again before they can get to really contribute their research expertise, which generally, I think, in many cases is not writing SIP proxies and doing call distribution functions in that. They're necessary, but they are not really where the research is. We are trying to remove that barrier to entry to researchers and indeed to companies that may not have the individual research budget to do that. And we would actually, and I'd like to turn that around a bit, is to see what are the kind of features that you would like, and this is really, we won't have time to discuss all of them today, but that you would like based on your experience, both good and bad, in trying to do related research, that we should incorporate into the platform to make it easy for both companies that want to offer novel services and researchers that want to prototype, explore, evaluate new opportunities to make sure that the platform, both on the access side and the back office side, if you like, to best support that. And that's going to be an ongoing conversation far beyond today's workshop to do that. And it will be not a one-time thing. It will be an evolving thing, and the open source and open access guidelines and spirit will hopefully facilitate that. But certainly, if you have any quick comments on that, that would be the beginning of that conversation.
This is Andrew, just to go back to something that Jonathan had said. I appreciate your support for including the deaf and hard of hearing community, and I appreciate the fact that you value having a competitive environment where individuals can choose which platform they may want, whether it's a platform from a provider standpoint or the FCC's neutral platform. I do want to emphasize that in order to have full competition, the providers need to be able to have funding and resources to remain competitive, and they should not be in a situation where the providers are unable to compete with their own platform and being forced to adopt this new platform, because that would not encourage a robust competitive environment. So again, I just appreciate you keeping us involved as a deaf and hard of hearing community.
If you don't mind, I could add to that as well. Just to clarify, when I'm talking about technology and specifically a transfer, what I mean is that the research is just not happening to that level. And instead, we're looking at the everyday use of video relay service. And I have some concerns about that because there's still some grayness to this particular area. And in a way to improve the platform, I think that there are other people that could benefit from being able to improve their calls, but improving the technology is a different thing altogether. The FCC providers are approving certain things and not approving.
Let me just add.
Just one second.
We need to clarify something.
I'm sorry.
Hold on one second. Just to clarify the interpreter error, just to clarify one thing, Christian was suggesting that he wants to know if the providers are still going to be able to innovate, do their own stuff basically, or have to submit that to the FCC for their approval every time they want to make an adjustment to their current platform, should they choose not to use the neutral platform. Okay, and sorry if there was any misunderstanding. I can voice for myself if you rather. It's your choice.
Good morning. Okay, what I'm talking about is the technology transfer. Suppose that you have a research environment that makes some improvement to the BIS platform. And now my question is, how do we get this to other people for everyday use in the real world? If the research community distributes it to other people, can they immediately use it for everyday cause in the real world? Or do you have to go through some kind of approval process where you submit it to the FCC or to some provider and hope that they will adopt it and approve it for everyday use?
So let me just address that in two ways. Namely, one is the whole goal of the two platforms is permissionless innovation. Is kind of a buzzword that's often used in this context. Namely, you should be able, as a researcher, within broad bounds of appropriateness to the programmer modus, we don't want to create a game network, for example, here, but that you have as long as it supports relay services, it should be possible for a research organization to build on top of a platform without having to go through a rulemaking. Now, whether we mandate and fund that at large scale, none of the processes which the Commission has are obviated by that need, and we need your input, indeed. But often, what happens, I believe, is that if you can demonstrate value, and not just you personally, but researchers, new entrants, existing companies, then there's an opportunity to make better and better informed judgment for it to become either a mandated part of our relay services that are required to be provided by all of them, because we now have, at that point, a demonstration that it works, it's not science fiction. It can be deployed at scale. The technology is not just something that you can do in a university research lab, but it works within the framework, and that it is useful to people who need it. And that could be a larger community or a smaller community, some of those you mentioned. So our hope is not that this is an approval process where you have to convince us or anybody else at the Commission, but the idea is to give a framework for exploration that gets much closer to deployability and scale than we've been able to do in the past. It's an experiment. We don't know yet whether it will succeed, but we look towards you and your colleagues to give it a chance and make it work. That's our best hope that we know of how to at least initially get beyond this adoption problem, in the sense that you can now show as opposed to just talk or describe or publish.
Lisa?
And I just wanted to add, so we don't lose it, I know you're looking today to look at what is actually some of the pieces that would fit together. And I think that I really want to thank you for and I think it's hugely important what Andrew said and how you agreed, that users themselves must have part of this process. And however you can do it, by opening up the process with blogs or whatever you can do to let actual users get you feedback is important. But I can tell you I've heard from people who have a hearing loss that, for example, the new wideband audio, HD audio, that will help people with hearing loss to be able to understand what they can and augment. I mean, my vision in the future is to have video and audio, and I love this idea of interoperable video. But so that's a piece, but you have to, again, going to what Christian was saying, what's actually usable by people, because the seniors are going to be different than somebody who uses sign language, than somebody who's deafblind. But I don't want those seniors to be left out either, because unlike the small deaf-blind community, they're a huge community, but they get forgotten too, because, and this is the other piece, one of the reasons why I was talking about the larger community knowing about this, it's also people with hearing loss themselves. Somehow the outreach has to be part of this also. Can't be just you make this wonderful thing that nobody knows about. Part of it's got to be that everybody finds out and uses it, both all of the beneficiaries, as you were talking about.
And we look exactly towards your organization and the other organization we presented there to make that translation happen, because you have a reach that we don't necessarily always have. But it has to be a multi-pronged effort in that. And there's different types of involvement are appropriate at different stages. As you know, and I would, again, that is an ongoing conversation how we can make that happen in the early research stages where it is not quite ready for large-scale deployment, but we want to make sure users are involved early on, to the widespread dissemination when we do either experiments at scale, which again, the advantage I hope we will have is that we can very quickly scale up. The advantage of software-based technologies compared to the hardware-based model that we've had, and you alluded to that early on, is where you don't necessarily have to distribute hardware when you do a new service, which inherently limits the scalability of a service. You can now distribute an app or modify software and just update the software that users have already.
Go ahead, Andrew.
No, you go first. I'll go next. Go ahead, please, Jonathan.
Just to follow up on that, I think it's very important that this research include that assessment component so that we don't rely on individuals who are aware of opportunities and use blogs, but that we have standardized assessments across the spectrum of hearing users, from people with excellent hearing who wish to communicate with people who have communication difficulties to include the deaf as well, so that we understand what the need is and how these new technologies are meeting the need or not meeting the need. We need that standardized assessment through research to help guide this process.
And this is Andrew, just to let you know. There is a coalition of deaf and hard of hearing consumer organizations that gets together every month. And we have developed a TRS policy statement that kind of discusses what we expect to see in relay services and what functional equivalency should look like. I would encourage you to incorporate some of these items that we have developed in your research. I think that they could work in parallel together very well.
We have we started a few minutes late, so we're going to have this panel go on for a few more minutes and then wrap up. I have before me a question from the audience, a question from online. If I didn't get to other questions, I apologize.
Some of those we can address in the second panel as well.
That's right. So one question from the audience is the National Science Foundation and National Institute on Aging are healthcare agencies. Can we have the FCC work with disability-centered agencies such as the Access Board or Department of Education's NIDRR in conducting research? Short answer, yes. To the extent there are federal agencies that can direct us as to how research dollars could be spent, we can work with them. Because, as you just heard Lisa say, we're dealing with different populations of users. Our intent is to work with different federal agencies. To repeat what I said earlier, the FCC doesn't have the authority and doesn't have the experience in giving out research grants. So for the aging population, one reason that we've worked with the National Institute on Aging is for that very reason, and National Science Foundation gives us a somewhat different focus, somewhat different access to researchers, and so the suggestion of other federal agencies is a very good one. Thank you for that question from the audience. And then that question that came online, as this research is publicly funded, will all federal research funded by this product be free and open available by all citizens? Again, the answer is yes. Short answer is yes. With these research dollars and with the neutral platform, our intent is to make as much open and available as we are permitted to. We would like the results of research to be made publicly available and shared. We would like the communications platform that's developed to be open source so that it can be publicly available and shared. We would like researchers to be able to use that platform. We would like experimenters to be able to use that platform. We would like software coders to be able to use and develop to that platform. I said earlier that the FCC has not directly funded research into relay services. I use the word directly for a reason. The FCC has been funding research into relay services for a long, long time. But that funding has gone for good purpose, but it goes to the providers. The providers whose business, some of whose business is solely the provision of relay services. The FCC administering the Telecommunications Relay Service Fund is the only way in which some of these companies get any monies. Andrew said they're for-profit companies. The profit comes from the Telecommunications Relay Service Fund. We've never directed that research. We've never gotten the results of that research and been able to share it publicly. We've never even known, for that matter, whether some of the research was conducted. But the money has been spent anyway. This effort, this is an open, transparent effort. This is an effort to say, we're going to keep spending money on research. We're going to keep spending money on the development of communications technologies to assist all of us. And we're going to do so in a public way. We're going to do so in a transparent way. We're going to do so in a way that the results of that research are shared, are made available, so that we don't run into problems of interoperability in the future, so that we can draw in other kinds of companies that have not traditionally been part of the TRS pool. That's our hope. We succeed, we don't succeed, that's up to all of us. We're going to give it our best shot. And this panel, this workshop, it's one step. It's an early step. This isn't the end. And so with that, again, we are indebted to the four of you for being here. To those of you who have shown up and will participate in the second panel. We're not doing this in a vacuum. We're doing this all together. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for being in the first panel. We'll take a very short break, just a few minutes, to give people time to stretch their legs, and then we're going to assemble the second panel and move on.
Let me very quickly say thank you to panel one, and we will take a really quick break in an effort to stay as close to on schedule as possible. So if you can be back in your seats at 11:25, and if panel two can take their place at the table after we get set up for that particular panel. Thank you.
Most of our people.
Everybody, if you could please take your seats. We're going to get started. Okay, the false alarm is over. Everybody can take your seats. We're going to get started again. Let me also remind you, if you have a cell phone, if you turned it on or turned the ringer off while you were on break, please silence your phones. Thank you for taking your seats so quickly. Before we get started with panel 2, I want to introduce Greg Leibach, who is Chief of our Disability Rights Office, to tell you about a very important item coming up next week.
Thanks, Susan. Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to let you guys know, if you don't already, about this coming Thursday, 2 days from today's open meeting. There are 2 major disability-related items on between now and Thursday. Quite the busy week for us. It's not happened. This crazy kind of week has not happened in my almost 13 years here. At the Commission's open meeting this Thursday, we will be voting on the closed captioning on television quality item. It's a long-standing item, quite important, so it will be voted on this Thursday. Please, everybody in this room, your friends, your family, invite them all. We'd like to have a packed house next Thursday for the open meeting to show our support for this particular closed captioning item. Again, this Thursday, the meeting is slated to start at 10:30 here in the Commission meeting room. So come one, come all. Hopefully we'll see you there Thursday. Thank you very much. And again, it's in this room. Thanks.
Thank you. And we'll proceed to a second packed panel, which I very much look forward to. Without further ado, I wanted to proceed through the introductory remarks of each of the speakers. Again, I apologize to the speakers that I won't read their full bios. You can pick those up if you haven't already at the entrance door. So I'll just say a brief word on each one of those who have kindly agreed to participate this morning. And I'm particularly pleased that many of the participants have not been in this room before, which I think is an indication, at least, of our attempt to broaden the discussion to a larger community. We start out with Dr. Sandra Gordon-Saland, who's a professor and director of a doctoral program in clinical audiology at the University of Maryland. Please.
As indicated, I'm an audiologist and professor in the Department of Hearing and Speech Sciences at the University of Maryland. I direct a research program concerned with age-related hearing loss, with a specific focus on factors that contribute to the older listener's difficulty understanding speech in challenging or difficult listening situations. This work has been supported by the NIA since 1985. Our findings, as well as those of others, generally have shown that hearing loss among older people is the principal factor limiting speech understanding, but additional factors of decline in central processing of timing information, called temporal processing, and in cognitive abilities also contribute to speech recognition difficulties in this population. So I would like to describe the current consumers of TRS technologies and the potential consumers, older people with age-related hearing loss. And then I wish to pose several research questions that I believe are essential in moving this initiative forward. So current consumers of TRS, here we go. I show an audiogram at the top here. Those in red have normal hearing across the frequency spectrum. The individuals in yellow, the hearing thresholds in yellow indicate people who identify with the deaf community and generally have severe to profound hearing loss. The prevalence of this population is about 0.38% or 1.14 million in the U.S. Only 55.6% graduate from high school, only 5% from college. Family income is significantly lower than that of hearing families, and unemployment rate is about twice that of the general population. I realize these data are a little bit old, but that's all I could really find. This raises potential concern about the affordability of technology for many in this group, which I wanted to underscore. A large untapped population of potential users of TRS IP technology are older individuals with acquired hearing loss classified in the mild to moderate and severe hearing loss range. They identify with the hearing community, and as said before, the prevalence rate approximates 50% of people over 65 years and increases with age. So there are about 20 million today, and that number is going to increase as the baby boomer population ages. They have difficulty hearing the consonants of speech. These are the people in blue over here, so they're missing high-frequency consonants and thus misperceive what is said, especially on the telephone because of limited bandwidth. In addition, they have difficulty hearing speech in noise and in reverberation, as well as understanding fast speech, accented speech, or computer-generated speech. These problems are associated in part to their limited audibility, but also to deficits in temporal processing. Aging is also accompanied by decline in working memory, speed of processing, and attention. These factors also contribute to speech understanding problems. And in the context of IP technology, errors in text transcriptions of speech may interfere excessively with speech processing by older people. Vision impairment also affects older people, with 18% of the older population having very limited vision abilities. So the overall goal of research for this initiative is to maximize access to and success with current and emerging TRS technologies. I'm out of time. Do you want me to go through this in another couple?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Some broad research questions are listed here. They include, first, are potential users aware of TRS? Do they use the service, and do they experience difficulty with this service versus telephone service? And we already heard a bit this morning about some of the difficulties encountered. These types of issues can be addressed in survey studies. Second question is, how successful are current users with the telephone versus TRS in its current and future forms? These questions should be addressed with laboratory assessment studies. And we know how to do this. And third, how successful is training to improve use of TRS? We can't just provide the technology and expect people to be able to use it, especially the older population. So again, laboratory-based training studies, or perhaps with implementation in the home environment, will be critical. For each of these questions, there need to be comparisons of these two constituent groups, and we've also mentioned some other constituent groups, particularly the deaf-blind, and there are also people who use cochlear implants. That would be another constituent group. So we need to examine common difficulties experienced, strategies to adapt if there is communication breakdown, and I guarantee there will be, and individual factors that may contribute to difficulties in using the technology. So I welcome the opportunity to discuss these and other issues pertaining to the fundamental research that is crucial to launch the new IP technology successfully. And I'm thrilled that older people with age-related hearing loss will be considered as potential consumers, because this growing segment of the population can benefit tremendously from this new technology. They call Social Security, they call Medicare, they call Medicaid, and they are lost in the conversation. So I wish both the FCC and the NIA great success in this joint venture, and I thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts with you today.
Thank you. Next, we have Matt Hunafter, who's a associate professor of computer science and linguistics at the City University of New York, CUNY, and that's part of his research focus is to work on computer technology to people who are deaf or have low levels of written language literacy. Please.
Hello. And actually, if you could start the slide soon, that would be great. Thanks. Go. So I'm Matt Unifauth from City University of New York, and I direct the Linguistic and Assistive Technologies Laboratory, and I'll describe some of my work today, and this is joint work with several students at my laboratory and includes many deaf and hard of hearing students and researchers. My work has been funded by the National Science Foundation and other sources. So it's well known that American Sign Language can make online information more accessible for many people who are deaf. And my laboratory's focus is conducting experiments with deaf participants to evaluate the understandability of ASL videos and ASL animations. So while video of ASL is ideal for live communication, for online website content that might need to be updated frequently or generated on demand from a query, animation technologies can be another solution. So my laboratory conducts several lines of research. In one area of work, we study how to convert a script of an ASL message into a clear and understandable ASL animation of that information. In another line of work, and probably more relevant to this workshop, is my laboratory has a lot of experience in how to conduct well-designed studies that evaluate how clear ASL videos or animations are for users. So in several of these evaluations, we compare side-by-side alternative forms of ASL videos or animations with different linguistic properties or different technical settings. And in this way, we're able to determine what aspects of these stimuli affect how clear and understandable they are for users. So, for example, the information that's displayed might contain various elements of information, and then we'll ask users to respond to subjective evaluation questions or comprehension questions about the information content. So in this way, we can optimize technical details about ASL videos or animations and determine how to make them most clear for these users. In this way, my lab's been able to determine the properties of ASL videos and animations that affect their understandability. In particular, we've identified the need to clearly convey various linguistic properties of ASL and how, if these are not clearly conveyed, the understandability of the message decreases. My lab's also published quite a bit on methodology details for how to effectively design experiments that will evaluate how understandable a message is for users. And this includes how to recruit and screen for participants, how to design stimuli and questions for studies, and other factors. We've also published quite a bit on how to best benefit from and encourage the participation of people who are deaf and hard of hearing in the research process and in the evaluation process of these technologies. So I'll give you two little examples of some recent work. So in one line of recent work of a methodological nature, we've been understanding how the various things you show for comparison in a study might affect the scores you actually get for how clear something is in a study. So in some work, we've understood that if you want to ask people comprehension questions, you really need to show them some baseline that you're also comparing something to. And we found that if you change the baseline for comparison shown in a study, it actually affects quite significantly the subjective evaluations that users have of how clear a message has been in the case that you are trying to evaluate. In other recent work, we've been studying how eye tracking technologies can reveal how clear or understandable an ASL video or animation is for users. So we found particular eye movement metrics that correlate with how signers report a certain video or animation is clear or understandable. So this is exciting because this is another way that we can evaluate how clear these stimuli are for users without having to ask them explicit questions that measure comprehension of particular information facts from the stimulus. It's also a way that we could technically detect automatically when someone is having trouble understanding a message by monitoring their eye movement patterns. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Next up, we have Dr. Dimitris Metaxas, who is a distinguished professor in the Division of Computer and Information Science at Rutgers University.
So good morning. I have more slides than I should, so I'm going to go fast. So I'm going to talk about cross-disciplinary advancing approaches to American Sign Language, which is collaborative. What's that not working? Sorry. Which is collaborative work between Rutgers, where I am, Boston University, Carol Nile, CUNY, Matt Hohenfeld, and Gallaudet University, Christian Vogler. And what I would like to show you is two examples of research from linguistic and technical perspective, and I'll conclude how that is important to FCC. So there are different types of signs, manual signs, that you're all familiar with, fingerspelled, lexical, classifiers. But there are also non-manual signs dealing with the face, like raised, lowered eyebrows, eye aperture, etc. So the question is, how can we analyze automatically by video so we can possibly compress the signal? So what we've been working on is first of all, on data capture, which is very important, and we've made publicly available databases, which is one contribution. So these are different views of somebody signing. This is a close-up view. And what the computer science comes in is the combination in terms of combining the linguistic knowledge into algorithms. And I'm going to show you now examples based on annotation that the linguists provide, how we can use that in learning methods to do tracking and analysis of video. So let's give you an example of negation. So I have not yet paid the rent, me. So what we output through the computer vision algorithms is the head pose and expressions. WH questions, similar things. Yes, no questions. There's in some of them there's video conditional. So there's all these linguistic, basically non-manual expressions that are important. So we have a framework that we analyze all this video. And here's examples of using a three-dimensional face to analyze the face. And we detect several features that we then output. And they are useful for linguistic purposes, but also for improving our computer vision algorithms. These are more data, and then you can get statistics. And what's important if we do all this is that we are developing new algorithms that can extract three-dimensional information from 2D, which is so important because of occlusion problems, etc. Now, if you did this, then what's extremely important for sign language and the FCC purposes is the following. Here's somebody signing. I can extract the video out of, I can extract the person, and what I can do is I can then do two things for FCC purposes. We can basically only focus on the person, remove the background, and therefore lower a lot the bandwidth issues. And we can also create publicly available knowledge to everybody through databases and through analysis that is very useful for research. Also, what's also very important is that we can advance the computer vision algorithms, which is very important for many, many other applications. So that's basically the summary in terms of how I can see FCC benefiting and the transmission of information by focusing on details and what's important as opposed to seeing the whole video and transmitting the whole video.
Thank you. We'll move on to a different modality, I suspect. Uwe Jost is currently Director of Voice-to-Text Research for Nuance Communication. Please.
Good morning. So Nuance has been providing a range of services for a number of years now that combine speech recognition technology with the work of human agents. And I want to spend the next few minutes to talk about some of the lessons we have learned and how I think they might apply to the Relay service. I hope the slides are coming up. Okay, thank you. So I listed here the main aspects that, in my view, make a difference between a speech recognition service that can work very well and where it struggles. First of all, speaker adaptation is very important. Now that means, first of all, that the system must have a chance to learn about the speaker, learn how a speaker speaks, what the speaker speaks about, what voice it's used, and so on. But it also works the other way around. It is very important that the speaker also has a chance to adjust to the system. We all do that all the time, usually without any perceived effort. We adjust to the situation we are in, we adjust to the speaker, we notice if something gets understood or not, and we react accordingly. The second key here to high speech recognition accuracy is audio quality. That is probably fairly obvious. If you can't understand it, the system probably can't understand it either. So that means we have to make sure the audio gets to the speech recognizer in the best possible quality. And last, I listed here sufficient resources. That's just required to make sure that the complex models that are required can actually run. So we need a lot of computing power and memory. To illustrate my point a little bit on a kind of best case scenario, I want to show you a screenshot of a demo, just a little concept demo we put together a while ago in my lab. Basically, this is a plug-in to Skype. It captures the audio from the microphone, so we get it at the highest quality. It sends it directly to the ASR and hands it over to Skype as well, of course. It then collects the input or the answer from the ASR as it comes in and essentially types it in the message box if you want. So that provides this instant feedback that I was talking about that the user needs to adjust to the system. And then you can see here on the text box, I manipulated a little bit recently, how the answers or the speech recognition result could stream in, and how you could, for instance, highlight any words that the speech recognizer might not be confident about, so that correction becomes easy. So this kind of shows a system that run on a high-end laptop, so had enough resources. So that kind of shows a situation where all the conditions are met and ASR can perform very well. I would think a regular user of such a system would probably not want to rely on agent backup. I think a regular user of such a system would be quite happy to just use the ASR to do the transcription, because the quality would be very high, correction could be done easily, and it would be very fast and, of course, very private. There wouldn't be any human involved in the chain. It gets more complicated when you go to a smartphone. There you can see a similar system working, but you would certainly have to use ASR on a server. You would have to hosted system, because your smartphone wouldn't be able to run the complex models we are talking about. And correction would be more complicated. So I would think if you use the smartphone system here, you would want to provide some agent backup and basically make sure that any utterances that have a very low confidence go to an agent for correction. And the worst case, from my point of view, from a speech recognition point of view, is when people use the old-fashioned phones where there is no screen and no feedback. There you would have to call into a server. Again, the system could still adapt to the speaker, but you wouldn't have the other way around. The speaker wouldn't see what the system can recognize. And there, I think, a large number of utterances would have to be corrected by a human agent to make it work well. That's all for now.
Okay. And last, we have Greg Vanderhaan, who's been a long-term contributor to a variety of FCC efforts, certainly among others. He's director of the Trace Research and Development Center and professor in the Industrial and Systems Engineering Biomedical Engineering departments at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Greg?
The FCC's goal of creating a platform or ecosystem that not only supports improvements in the current relay service, but also allows relay services to take advantage of new technologies to improve future relay services is laudable. And it's critical to the future of effective and affordable relay services, especially given the aging population. I'd like to highlight three key things that need to be part of that platform: interoperability, ubiquitous multimodal communication, and compatibility with mainstream systems. These are needed to allow competition, innovation, and address the needs of people who need mixed communication modes, and the ability also to take advantage of the mainstream technology's ability to scale and new advances in the technologies. A couple of sentences on each of these. Interoperability is one of the most important things that the FCC can do. In order to ensure reliable end-to-end calls and for people to build on each other's work, either competing or cooperating with each other, there needs to be an underlying framework consisting of specific technologies and standards that are to be used for interoperability today, and a path for maintaining interoperability as technology and standards change. This is what industry does for its mainstream voice technologies, but this has not happened for access technologies. So it falls to the FCC to do this. This is an essential first step in creating a relay service platform that can both adapt to changing technologies and take advantages of the advances in the technology market. The second key is ubiquitous multimodal communication. And by this I mean users should be able to use any combination of voice, real-time text, and video on any voice call, including any relay call. For some groups, like individuals who are deaf, blind, and sign, the need to mix text in one direction so that it can support large print or braille, and the ability to sign in the other is, when talking to a relay, it's easy to see. But it's also very helpful to have real-time text on a VRS call to clarify unknown words, credit card numbers, addresses, etc. It can reduce errors, avoid misunderstanding and confusion, and speed up communication. This is critical in emergency calls, but it's also important in daily communication. A second example would be adding video to a voice call, which can increase intelligibility and, with a text backup for mistakes, can also allow some people to communicate directly, using the relay service only as a backup when this voice, video, real-time text method falls. If we add a try harder, try different feature, which can allow direct communication to be used without risk to the user, since they can always instantly draw in a relay service if or when the direct communication fails. And at the same time, this can reduce the use of the relay services where they are not needed. Automatic speech recognition is another place where the power of supporting multimodal communication and strategies can be seen. Although it may be 15 to 30 years before ASR is better than humans at recognizing speech under different conditions, if ASR is combined with speaker text correction and the try harder, try different feature, ASR could be a viable solution that is effective enough to be an option in the next 5 years for some users who would choose it due to its capability for instant answer, faster speed, and inherent privacy. Again, knowing they can instantly call in a human interpreter if it doesn't work for any particular call. Finally, and simply, building the relay services off of mainstream technologies without modification can both A, lower the cost for relay services, and B, provide a path for users to opt for direct communication with others, including the public, with only using the relay services as a fallback for communication when it fails in the direct communication. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to, since we have, I think, covered a very broad range of topics, and appreciate that the contributions in such a short time that everybody was able to make, let me try to organize the discussion a little bit by modality, recognizing Greg's notion that we shouldn't really think in those silos, but I think there are some somewhat different research issues involved. So I wanted to start out with a question that more starting in what we currently have, what you would see collectively across your respective expertise as the major limitations of existing relay services, not just implementation, but as a model itself. I think you had started out a little bit in that usability concerns, so if you have particular comments, but anybody else who want to chime in on that. And then I'll try to transition to a more long-term perspective based on both the video side and the speech text side.
Okay, thank you. From what I gather, with the older population with acquired hearing loss, as I said, these individuals identify with the hearing community. They are generally not aware of TRS services, and I think that the current use of those services is minimal. And so it's partly an access issue, but partly just an awareness issue, which is why I mentioned that some survey data would be extremely valuable. And I've been thinking about how to even get this information and who could be deployed to convey this information to this population. And it seems to me it might be through because this population does not have a community, as we just heard about the deaf and hard of hearing community. They've aged into the hearing loss. A lot of people are in denial about the hearing loss, and yet they still have these kinds of communication difficulties, especially on the phone. So it seems to me it would be valuable to deploy some of the national organizations like the American Academy of Audiology or the American Speech Language Hearing Association to work through audiologists who deliver services to this population to, expand their knowledge base and information that they convey about the use of this technology. But I don't think it's used.
So are you aware for people when you have the awareness problem, but the other issue that sometimes arises that you provide a technology to people and then they find it really doesn't quite meet their needs. So, for example, for IPCTS, it may not be quite what people have expected. So do you have any insights on once you introduce people to that technology, how well they can actually use it, or do you have abandonment problem? In a sense, people try it and say, well, it sounded good or it looked good, whatever the metaphor you want to use, but it doesn't really quite serve it. Anybody else who want to chime in on that as well?
Again, with the aging population with age-related hearing loss, I do think it depends which cohort you're talking about. There are generational differences. There's what's called the GI generation, 75 plus, whereas versus kind of the aging baby boomer generation. I do think that they have different levels of willingness to embrace new technology and sophistication with that technology. I actually had pulled out some data about cell phone use, like smart cell phone use among that GI generation is only 56%, whereas, all adults age 18 plus is more like 88%. And similarly, that GI generation, less than like 31% have a desktop or 20% have a laptop, whereas, the use of computers is probably 100%, in the younger generation. So we may see some cohort differences, generational differences is what I'm suggesting, but it seems to me that in either case, there needs to be some training involved and assistance in setting up the technology, even knowing where to go for the technology. But once it is demonstrated that the technology is useful, I think people will embrace it, absolutely.
Anybody else want to speak to that?
Yeah, one of the things in working with elders that we found is the more you can make something be an extension of their current experience and their current model, if you will, mental model, the more you'll see adoption. They don't like being made to feel stupid. And technology already does that to all of us. So if it's doing that to us, imagine what it does to people who haven't been using it or are forced to use it before. So there are ways to design things, but they have to be designed for that. And our technologies today are now flexible enough that we can actually take something more complicated and make it act really, really simple. And we have some examples of that have worked very well. So I think that part of the lack of adoption that we see is that threshold, getting them over the barrier, this feeling that they can't do it, and that they're just not smart enough, that they're old and they can't learn this stuff. So if we start where they are and get them over that, then what we see is they actually make a lot of progress after that.
Okay. And trying to accommodate some of the questions that are being handed to me, that might actually be a natural follow-on. We have a number of what you might call legacy technologies, TTY, which hasn't been mentioned, I think was mentioned briefly in the first panel, and there is a concern always, as I think became clear in the first panel, you certainly don't want to step backwards on what you have, particularly because some of those technologies do seem to be relatively simple and easy to use. So I wonder if any of you have opinions on the technologies for analog-based technologies as well as others that might exist today as to how we can best migrate those, or what can we learn from those technologies to migrate those to an internet-based system, as well as what have been some of the success and maybe not so success factors for those technologies that we should be sure not to replicate in those. Greg, I think you have strong opinions on that.
Yeah. Part of the problem is that engineers just can't help themselves, and programmers. And that is that when you have something as flexible as a computer, why not make it do many, many things? Interestingly, a lesson I learned a long time ago from the remote control industry, the universal remote controls that you can program, something like 85% of them are purchased to replace a single control that was lost, not to be used to control more than one thing. And then once they're purchased, they're not ever used to control multiple things because people can't figure out how to make this one thing operate all the different things reliably. Engineers, et cetera, make up the top 15% or whatever. We have this, for example, the TTY. It's a single function device. And whenever we see this being introduced into new technologies, what we do is we put it on a laptop or something, and we immediately put it on as an app. And then we say, oh, you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this. And we start taking people away from what they're used to and what's worked. And that is a world where there was a thing for making a phone call and a thing for writing letters and a thing for doing this. And so I think that if we were to control ourselves and to take things like tablets or a small laptop or something and create it so that it was just a single function device. And when you turned it on, you never saw the operating system. You never saw anything. You just saw something as simple as a TTY, a display, keyboard, and it just did the one thing, that we could find that many elders, et cetera, could make the move over. And in fact, we could have something that worked better than a TTY, but we have to aim for simpler, not, oh, better because it has more features and functions and it also does this and it also does that, because I think that that'll lose. Now, it's not that elders can't do that, it's just that some elders can't, and some elders can't learn this confusion in the same way some of us have trouble with remote controls.
Okay. Anybody else wanted to chime in on that? Let me then move on to a bit more, so to say, longer-term time horizon that the second panel is particularly qualified to talk to. Is I think we've seen two key technologies discussed this morning. Namely, one is the speech-to-text technology, and one is technologies related to video, primarily ASL generation and acquisition and translation. And so I wanted to follow up. Let me start, and we'll get to the text part in a few minutes. Let me talk a little bit. Let me ask you a little bit about the ASL side. Very interesting presentation on recognition and analysis. What I wonder about is, what do you see as both research challenges as well as the opportunities in actual use, as opposed to as a means of understanding, say, ASL grammar, usage, and understandability for vision-related research in ASL, and obviously on the generation part as well. Whoever wants to start out.
So, as I mentioned, yes, there is very of course, research for linguistics and computer vision, but the use of this technology for people is like you can transmit very little information because you can focus with these tools on the person, in particular the face or the hands, and you can transmit when necessary high resolution. Basically, when the fingers move in detail, then you can pick it up and transmit in full resolution versus low resolution when you don't need.
So you see it primarily as a means to make ASL transmission available on limited bandwidth channels that would otherwise not be sufficient for video?
But also for ASL generation that Matt is working, which is also very important, and also to engage deaf people with non-deaf people. If you can translate in real time based on video ASL, then that opens the deaf community to other communities. Elderly could use maybe a subset of ASL to communicate if they cannot hear. So the sky's the limit afterwards if you can translate properly.
And so the big question is if part. So how would you see, and it's not just to you, but anybody who would like to speak to that, as to what you see as between what look like very impressive videos to something that works in the realities of life, so to say, that you and Greg, Sandra and Greg have alluded to as well in that. Is it the quality that Uwe mentioned earlier, the input quality? Is it just variability, occlusion, all of these other factors? If you could delve into that a little bit more.
We just, after 15 years that I've been working on this topic to get the 3D, I mean, the problem with sign language is, technically, is that it's multimodal. It's the face and the hands. Now we have high definition. We didn't have before. So because of this, we have the proper signal now, and we'll have better signals. And now we have the learning methods. We're starting to have the data sets that are needed to train the algorithms. And now we have the computer vision algorithm after all these years to extract 3D information and analyze the signal so that we can translate into English. So we're starting now, and I think the next 10 years you're going to see real-time systems. We do have already a real-time system for the face, not for the hands because it's much more complicated, the movements. But I think 10 years from now it's all going to be an app on an iPhone. In terms of translating the signs into English words, not translating that into English text, because it's different, as you saw, when they don't speak exactly as in English, as in spoken English. That's another type of research, of course. But just to translate to English, which understood, I think within the next years you'll see that. Potentially in research, even in the next 3-4 years, we're close.
Greg, you wanted to...
One of the amazing things we're now finding is that with the ability to just use massive computing power, we are now finding that work in translation, for example, if you just have the original versions and a translated versions, and you have enough of those, that a computer can then begin to create translations of new text based upon just seeing lots and lots of examples. And so if, and I will skip over all of the privacy and other issues that we would have to find our way through. If it was possible to take all of the sign language VRS interactions and somehow anonymously give them to a machine which didn't look at what was being said, but just looked at what the translations were for the signs and things. And we just put a huge amount of computing power on it, which is very easy and getting easier to do every day. I wonder if we wouldn't be able to find that we might get faster to sign language interpretation, et cetera, in this kind of a fashion than we could ever afford to get in terms of hiring researchers to try and figure out rules and things like this. In other words, just plain look at what's being done and have the correlation kind of things used to extract the meaning. And this kind of a thing, it was just not possible before. We didn't have these kinds of capability. And it was just pointed out, we didn't have the resolution. We didn't have, with the new data that was just being talked about, fed in and having a huge corpus. And that's the other thing you need is a huge corpus. And so only something like the relay service or something could generate that. Could we anonymously go through and attack this problem in an entirely new way?
Okay. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I can't speak to the technology side particularly, but the notion that there could be real-time, high-quality video available for older people in phone conversations would be a tremendous advantage because the kinds of acoustic information that older people are missing is kind of available on the face and on the lips. So putting together what they can hear with what's visible on the lips often improves speech understanding tremendously. But adding to that, having text available, kind of like closed captioning, will also be a tremendous advantage. So putting together those three pieces of information, I think older people with age-related hearing loss would do extremely well. So if that's where we're heading in the future, I think that would be a fabulous goal.
So are you aware of quantitative studies that illuminate the advantage that video can offer?
Yes. There's a researcher from Walter Reed, Ken Grant, who has done a lot of work on auditory visual speech perception and how much benefit vision provides. I've also done a study myself on the benefit of closed captioning and video available while watching television for older hearing impaired people. And they were using, we tested them in 4 conditions without their hearing aids or closed captioning at all, just watching the television at a comfortable listening level. We tested them with their hearing aids, and then we tested them with closed captioning, like everything combined. And the older people were getting about 20% correct, even with their hearing aids alone. But once they had the television, the audio, and the closed captioning, they were getting about 80% correct. You'd think it would be 100% correct, but they still have difficulty putting together all of this information.
Okay. before I move on from the ESL side, I want to make sure if anybody would want to comment on both opportunities and challenges on the ESL on ESL research. Please.
Sure. I do work in the area of synthesizing animations of ASL, but I always do get very nervous when folks start talking about automatic translation. So I think that there might be situations in the world where technologies that can produce animations of sign language might have some uses where interpreters aren't available right now. But I think we always have to be extremely careful that any technologies in the area of translation with sign language never appear as some kind of replacement for high-quality interpretation services. And so that's something that I feel like I always need to voice when issues around this come up.
So where would you see exactly those supplemented? I think you're making an
well, I mean, so one thing I did want to comment on was what I think we have a much stronger awareness now in fields of speech and language and also in fields of computer science is conducting careful studies to really understand what people who are deaf and hard of hearing interpret as the usability or the effectiveness of different technologies, or how well information has been conveyed in videos or animations of sign language or other means. There's a lot of really terrible ways to do an experiment. There's a lot of ways to not measure what you think you're measuring. And I think that fields in terms of doing these kinds of studies have really matured, where we understand how to measure things just the right way. And I think that bank of expertise is very relevant to the FCC in some of this new funding that's moving forward to make sure that there is some actual ground truth. What we think is understandable really is. My lab has some experience doing studies where we've asked folks to please subjectively rate how well they think they've understood something, and we've also asked them comprehension questions about the information content of what was conveyed, and we found that people can be very confidently wrong sometimes. And so, you know, if you see studies where folks are just saying how well they think they understood something, you need to have a healthy disbelief of that. And so I think this whole set of methodological aspects of people intersecting with technology, where those people are people who are deaf and hard of hearing, I think is a whole kind of expertise that can be helpful to this effort.
Okay. Since we have limited time, I wanted to make sure we talk about the other aspect as well, namely the issue of how do we integrate speech, text, and video most effectively in that. And so I'd be curious, again, the same type of question is, what would you see as the major challenges that better research in particular could address, or more focused research that would make it easier to use speech to text as well as text to speech as a supplement or partial replacement for the type of technologies that we use today. And I don't know if I suspect both Uwe and Greg may have opinions on that, and maybe Sandra as well. But
yeah, one of the things that we need to look at is adoption. So, as was pointed out, you can always get people into a room and run something by them and see what they think of it. And they may talk about how it would be good in this or that situation, but whether they turn to it on a daily basis, when they have a human being that would be there that's free and they just push a button and they have it. One of the things that we looked at earlier, and I think might apply here, is something we call try harder, try different. And if somebody is thinking to make a call and they say, well, I could use this automatic speech, and I know it's nice because it instantly answers and it's fast and it's private, but what if I get in the middle of the conversation, it doesn't work, so I just bail out and I go over and I use the human interpreter. But if I have the try harder, try different, then I can actually be in the call, and if I have trouble, I hit a button and I instantly get a human on and I can keep going. And then I can even kick them back off again if I decide I'm past that part and I want to be private again. But it gives me the opportunity to try the automated fashion. And this kind of a thing can allow you to introduce automated in a way that's much earlier than you'd ever find anybody would ever use it otherwise, because people can get into it. And they may find that they get through many conversations just fine. And then they're in an airport and it doesn't work at all, and they hit the button and it goes away. So it can always be that you fall back to Relay when you really need it, but you don't use it
because you might need it, and that can make a big difference. But research into that and other techniques like that can allow us to figure out how people make decisions about what they use and how we can get them to be using the thing that's going to work best for them in different situations. I think that type of research, not just the straight research about this technique in isolation and that one in isolation. And then finally, the comment about having the three support each other, having the ability to see while you talk. If you've ever been in a party and you can't hear somebody, you'll find yourself looking at their lips. All of us do, because that's just a natural thing to do. And again, with the high resolution and stuff, we have that kind of a capability today. And then if you have the ability to, if you can't understand, somebody can just type it. It doesn't have to be that the whole conversation's captioned. You just need to have the ability to fall back on something absolutely reliable when things fail. And so that's that can I have a way of soft failing can allow us to move into these new techniques.
I want to talk specifically about the soft failing. I think that's a really good point. From my point of view, you want to make it look like it's automated. I mean, not hide the human, not lie to the user, of course, but just you speak to it, it gives an answer, and it should be correct. And whether this is done with a human in the backup or not shouldn't really bother you as a user. What you get is correct. And that basically relies on very good confidence modeling. You have to be able to automatically detect how accurate you are. And this technology is actually pretty good right now. Coming back to another point you raised before, data availability. That's the big thing, always. If we have enough data, we can train very, very good systems, and they will work very well. And from a research point of view, the challenge, apart from how do we get the data, is how do we build models with less data. That's usually, it's kind of our biggest problem usually. How do we build and adjust models? So again, we want to say the system needs to learn how the speaker speaks. But we don't want the user to have to spend hours talking to the system before it works well. So the challenge there is to kind of do the adaptation with like 5 minutes of speech.
Okay. Please.
Also, regarding the issue of speech-to-text technology, I think this is where laboratory-based studies are really critical, and to look at the human factors side. So I think there are a lot of variables in that speech-to-text transmission, such as the accuracy. So if there are some errors here and there, how can people accommodate that? Or the speed of the text that's being conveyed. Can people, particularly older people, handle a faster rate of speed? You need to consider the size of the text and the illumination of the text and how accessible that text is for people with low vision. So, it seems to me that this is particularly ripe for laboratory investigation, to look at different potential users of that technology and look at how we can maximize that speech-to-text transcription and delivery so that it's maximally usable to the end user.
Please.
I fully agree with everybody else.
You might want to put the microphone a little closer.
Yeah, I fully agree with everybody else. I want to, basically what is being, I think people allude here is, you can use this technology to also augment the experience. Like, I could highlight the video, for example, real time, or I could relate with graphical methods the text. So I can get the experience much better in real time. So there are methods to do this. So it's not only to translate into English or just to replace somebody, it's also to augment the experience. So I can highlight the hands when they mean something. Because when you sign, it's the beginning and the end. Usually the in between is not so important of the sign. So maybe I can highlight this and make it easier for them to understand, not only to translate. So the whole experience can be augmented with graphical and special effects that they use in video, in movies all the time. So it could be used for that as well, as long as we understand what the people are doing when they sign.
So is there an opportunities to kind of bridge the two modalities a little bit, to use the availability of video, because a number of people mentioned lip reading, or just simply using facial expressions to emphasize or confirm what you might be partially hearing as well. Is there a way, now that we have more multimodal communication available, hopefully, a way to actually not just rely on the audio part, but also augment the video to disambiguate, for example, speech? Is that a promising research, or is that unlikely to make much difference?
No, it has been done. I mean, people are working on artificial speech recognition, and it works particularly well in noise. So if you have a very clear speech, it doesn't really matter that much normally, but if you have noise or distortions, then basically lip reading can make a big difference as well.
Okay. I wanted to, anybody else on the speech-to-text type of questions? I wanted to pick up on one question that you mentioned, or one remark that you mentioned, namely that there's a difference between word accuracy and understanding. Namely, I'm just simply counting how many words are right. If I took your remark correctly in that, do we have, and this is, I think, spans remarks that almost everybody made, is that quantifying the user experience in terms of understandability, in terms of actual semantic understandability, as opposed to a verbatim transcript, since most of the time we're not looking at court transcripts here as the use case, seems to be a hard problem, and we seem to be making some progress on that. So I wonder if people want to comment on what feature, do we know how to evaluate that in real time so that you can do the fallback that a number of people have mentioned automatically maybe, without the user being dissatisfied first? Can we evaluate technology on an offline basis that does it, or can we also know as to how things are going from a user perspective for different modes, so that we have some idea where we should focus our efforts on? So I'm curious if anybody has thoughts on that particular area.
Well, I have been thinking about that, and I think initially it needs to be some kind of offline analysis and evaluation. Typically, labs like mine, where we evaluate age-related hearing loss and speech understanding problems, we often look at speech recognition. So it is how accurately does somebody actually understand what is said and could repeat it. So then did they actually get it or not? And as mentioned before, if we ask people to rate their intelligibility, how much of what was said they understood, they are often quite wrong. So we want to make sure that the message is accurately being received. So it's speech recognition is the first thing. But of course, in communication, in real communication, there's a back and forth, and somebody could be talking a little bit longer, and you can't ask somebody to just repeat verbatim what they heard. And so another type of metric would be speech comprehension, as I think was also mentioned a minute ago. So did they get the gist of the message? And those would be a third kind of technique is what's known as shadowing. So if there's a fairly long conversation, then you ask the person to kind of repeat what they heard in phrases. So these are three different types of techniques that have been used in the lab to look at accuracy in speech understanding for older people.
One of the things to keep in mind, too, is that aside from phatic or social communication, and a lot of communication carries nothing, no information, no hello and all that kind of stuff. But when you actually get to where you're communicating, communication occurs most when it's not predictable. But you understand most when it is predictable. So you'll have elders and they talk and they sort of guess what you're saying. And this also gets into, I understood everything that was being said, because you think you only got some of the information, but it sounded like he was talking about these things, and he does. But in fact, he was actually telling you that we're not going to go to the church as we always do, and we're going to go in the afternoon or the morning. And in fact, you go, and yes, of course I know, because he always tells me at this time he's going to pick me up at that time. So the trickiest part about this is the part of communication that we're worst at doing for speech recognition and for everything is when it's not what we're expecting. The user may not even pick up that they didn't hear it because they hear what they were expecting to hear. Sometimes you can even talk and throw in a word that's like another word, and people won't even tell that you went by with the wrong word because they hear what they were expecting to hear. So we have a challenge here in research, and that is to figure out how do we catch the parts that are different, how do we supplement. So somebody can do the whole conversation in speech, but there's only like 2 sentences they have to hear because there's data in them, and they don't already know it. So, and that's again could be how we can mix these different things together. Like we stop, we emphasize. If we had text, we could text it down. different ways of doing it, and then we can people can get by with things that wouldn't work for the little bits, but it can work for the mass. But we have to figure out how to detect where those are, so that we can, in fact, make sure that they were communicated. And the echoing kind of technique, things like this, when you're saying something that's not expected. If we're scientists, you can figure out where that is. Normal conversation, people don't do that. So how do we handle those?
See, this is extremely important. Another area that also is important for the elderly is summarization. They hear something, they don't remember, or they don't, or misunderstand. Can you summarize? Are there tools to summarize? And in addition to multimodally play with the augmentation of each of the modalities so that they can understand better in real time. But there's also offline applications.
Okay. So that's it. You just raised a point that I hadn't thought of before, and this is really great. You talk to somebody who's older, and even if you get the communication across, will they remember it? Individuals who use TTY sometimes will use a printer on them because they're trying so hard to interpret it that it's nice having a written record afterwards or something to go back to. And it didn't occur to me, but some use of text or captioning or something to capture really key. Now, you don't want to transcribe the whole thing, nobody will look at it. But if the sender could at certain points just inject something that would stay after the conversation was done, then for elders this might really tremendously impact their ability to have communication that in fact they can use and even remember later. And that's a very interesting observation.
Since we're running close to the end of our allotted time here, I wanted to give everybody a chance to answer one central question that we and the community will have to address, namely, where do we expend our very limited intellectual and financial resources on that, and I suspect it's more of the financial ones that are the limited ones. And so I want to ask you each a question where if you were to say what is a high priority field of research outside your own lab, which I'm sure is the most important one in each case, what would you see as kind of promising but maybe areas that haven't received the attention that they deserve? And like the summarization one was, I think, one which I don't think has appeared that often in this context, but might be an example of that. So I'll just start in the same order. If you can think of a topic that you wish outside your own immediate community that somebody should look at that would be really helpful to what type of work that you're doing or the needs that you see.
To me, the most basic question for people with age-related hearing loss is, can they use this technology that's currently available, and then move along and then track as new technologies become more available. I'd like to see people come into the lab, be shown the technology, and see if they can use it. We don't even know that.
Okay.
So I think a really interesting question as it relates to captioning technologies or text transcript technologies, text-to-speech, is what happens when the user has a difference in their English literacy level than what you might expect. So when automatic speech systems make errors, sometimes users can cope with it if they have very sophisticated English fluency. Mm-hmm. But the U.S. population is becoming more linguistically diverse, and there are differences in literacy trends, sometimes in the deaf and hard of hearing community for various educational and language reasons. And so if these users are faced with a caption that has errors in it because it's been produced in some automatic way, how does that literacy overlay affect their experience? I think there's a lot of open questions there.
Okay.
Yeah, so I won't add much, but the usability of the technology in terms of multimodal augmentation methods, smart integration of the multimodal signal, and the summarization we discussed. Yeah.
I would focus the funding on running trials with existing technology and existing services and collecting data. Collecting data about how you correlate how well it works with how satisfied users are, and collecting data about, that's the input, this is what the output, that's what the output you would like to see.
I'm going to recommend you don't fund what's most important. that you fund what won't be funded someplace else. Your entire budget is smaller than a medium-sized project at these funding agencies. Your budget is minuscule, okay? Don't fund things that are already of interest to scientists. Will be funded by one of the science organizations because it's, an area of understanding human speech or something like this. Don't fund what industry would find use for mainstream purposes because their budget, again, as you pointed out, dwarfs what you're doing. But fund those things that won't be funded by those other agencies. The integration, the application in these areas, the parts that aren't science-based, but you need to use science to get the answer, okay? So we don't want to advance science. What you want to use science to advance your ability to deliver and the ability of the services to be able to deliver better what your charge is. And so that's where I would say would be the general focus. And then you can sort that out by looking at what needs to be done, what can be done other places, or is being done, and then try and do the parts that nobody else is going to be doing.
Okay. Do you want to add any questions before we conclude?
No, I think that's an excellent point, the last one that was made. And our budget is limited. There's research that's not being conducted. Focus on that. And the FCC isn't just a dispenser of funds. We regulate many of the companies that are involved in the provision of the services, and we can convene, we can encourage. We can adopt rules. There are lots of ways the FCC can be involved other than just the expenditure of funds. So I think that's a great point that you make.
Okay, and I think we've reached the end of our allotted time. So I want to start by thanking all the panelists, both those who were on the first panel that set the stage and the second panel that I think allowed us in a very limited time to explore many of the highlights that will certainly inform our deliberations and how we best reach out to a broad community of researchers to fill in the gaps, as was mentioned, where existing research could be accelerated, made more effective, made more usable to the community as well as obviously to other researchers so that we can stand on each other's shoulders as opposed to each other's toes and make progress on a topic that we all care very deeply about. As I think we mentioned all in the very beginning, is that we have in a panel, a workshop of a duration that we have available. This is a beginning of a conversation. I hope that what we can do here is partially to facilitate that people, as Jonathan was saying, that may not otherwise have a reason to meet, have a reason to collaborate, can do so here, integrate a traditional, more health-oriented, the computer science, the policy, the user communities in ways that allows us to make much more rapid progress with the platform issues that were discussed in the first part of the workshop as one tool of many to accelerate progress in ways that we can leap ahead as opposed to fall behind. I do want to mention one. We have received a number of questions. Some of those are probably best addressed more to the Commission. So for those who have not seen that question addressed, feel free to reach out to any of the relevant Commission staff, and we will try to get back to you on those questions as well. Again, thank you very much for coming today. I can assure you this won't be the last opportunity in this topic area as we make progress on the research funding, as we make progress on the platforms. I'm sure we will reconvene in a variety of ways to make sure that all participants represented here, communities represented here, will continue to be able to inform what we do, to correct us if we get it wrong, to make it more effective, and to do it by the the scientific method, as you mentioned, namely learn not just in what we do technically, but also what we do policy-wise. That's really, from our perspective, one of the important parts is I don't think any of us claims that we know how to do it. We just hope to have mechanisms in place that we can learn quickly, fail on occasion, and learn from those failures and move on to what we're all here to do, namely improve the accessibility of communication, make it better for both the community of people who are deaf and hard of hearing, as well as those, the loved ones, the families, the companies, the organizations that benefit from communicating with those. With those, thank you very much.
Let me take the last word just to thank the people who organized this conference, in particular Wen Chen from the National Institute on Aging, and then from here in the Commission, from CGB, let me thank Kayla and Roger, Greg Leibach, Karen Pell-Strauss, and from my shop, Tamara, and Matt Quinn. Thank you all very much, and thank those of you who came to attend. It was a terrific beginning. Thanks.